So now let's take a look at some of the Neolithic monument. The previous ones are residential or mainly for residential purposes. The monument are refer to those structures that has no obvious living purposes. Something like the menhir, these solitude monolithic stone called menhir had been discovered in many different places of the world. The most famous one is in Brittany, France. So there, thousands of them had been discovered. What are these? What do they mean? And what are the significance of them? So there are many different theories about these stones. They are obviously significant because the erection of these stones require large human labor, and it must be very significant to the early human societies. But what exactly is that significance? Some believe they were to mark territory. Others believe they were used to make communication with ancestors, or they have shamanistic or ritual function. And to me, there is a more specific function for a piece of stone to be erected on the surface of Earth. So when you plant a stone on Earth, it casts shadow. And when it casts a shadow, it gives you a way to measure time. When the shadow of the stone is the shortest under sunlight, we call it the noon. When the shadow is the longest at daybreak, that is the morning. And when the sun is setting and casts the longest last shadow of the day on the ground, that is the evening. So by observing the shadow, you have a good sense about time passing. So this is the definition of time. This is the definition of the time. It can define time during a day. It can also define time during a year. Actually, if there is no stone casting shadow like this, there wouldn't be a year. You wouldn't be able to tell why the new year starts and why the previous year is passing. It's only when you start to see that the shadows come to the same location, same length at the same time during a cycle of days, you realize that the passing of time is cyclical, is repetitive. Then you start to define, we call this a year, and we call that a month, we call this a day, right? So this stone was capable of defining time. It's basically a sundial. Each and every monolithic vertical piece of stone is a sundial. During a cycle of a year, when the at a certain time, the direction, you can also observe the change of direction of length, for example, at noon, right? During a day, when the shadow is the shortest, we call it noon. But the length of that noon shadow varies day after day. At noon time, when the shadow is the longest, that is, and people observe at that time, the daytime was actually the shortest. And it is called the winter solstice. And during the cycle of the year, at noon time, during the shortest time of the day and the shortest day of the year, and that is called summer solstice. And on summer solstice, the daytime is the longest and the night is the shortest. And people also observe that the sun is almost directly above us, rather than in the winter solstice, the sun is quite tilted. It's quite, it's not directly above us. So by observing the shadow of the menhir, one could define time, define different moments in the day, and define different days over the year. And so when you have many stones lined up, you are capable to make more sophisticated depiction of astronomical phenomena. So to me, these monolithic stones, they all have some kind of astronomical function, and they are crucial for defining time. And defining time is very important for early farmers, because you rely on a good calendar to decide when to sow the seeds and when to harvest. If you miss the best time to plant, you might be starving in the winter. And these were life and death event, life and death factors in early human society. That is how to define time. Imagine a world without cell phone, without calendar. How do you know what time it is today? How do you know that today is September 15th? And that definition of time is very important, because as a society, you need it for collective agricultural activity. That would be very crucial for the existence of human life. So on one hand, these menhirs defined time. On the other hand, they also define space. For example, you put a piece of monolithic stone, you have a center. It becomes the kind of a coordinating origin. So you can refer to it on which side of that center you are located. So you could, a center, put definition to space, give you reference for space. And also the casting of shadows define the cardinal direction. You observe that the shadow only cast on one direction, on the northern hemisphere, right? Like in the old world, they are all in the northern hemisphere. And you call that direction north. That's the direction of the shadow. And the direction where the sun shines upon, that is south. And then when the shadow is pointing at its longest length, in the morning, that is pointing, the shadow is pointing west. And in the evening, it is pointing east. And so all these helps to define spatial consciousness, to define a center, define those cardinal direction. And all of these are very important to shape our consciousness. And our consciousness about space and time, to some extent, rely on those early invention of this monolithic stone. That's why I titled this lecture, define space and time for dwelling. And that is the beginning of architecture. That is also in the beginning, in the development of human consciousness as a domesticated reality that is tied to a specific location. So you only need to define space and time in this way with a fixed center when the life is settled, when the human existence is domesticated. And that is my theory. As to me, that is the true significance of these monolithic structures. And huge labor were needed to build them. With agricultural society, people have plenty of leisure time. The settled life is very different from the hunter and gatherers. Hunter and gatherers, you need to work every day to get your food, to get your nutrition. But for farmers, they only need to work in a certain time of the year. So that's why a calendar is important. But for the long winter, they have nothing to do. They just wait. If you are successful, if you have a successful calendar, if you define time and space successfully, you have plenty of food in the summer and the fall to preserve you from the harsh winter. But in the winter time, that's a perfect time to engage in construction. So this monumental structure is kind of made more possible for the settled life. So the monolithic stone were combined to make permanent home afterlife. And these are the so-called Dolmen Tomb. And the Dolmen Tomb is basically two big pieces of stone supporting one piece of slab. And sometimes it is the most rudimentary post and lintel structure in stone. But on the other hand, it could be created to form large tomb. You have more stones as post, more stone as lintel, and these become a collective tomb that could be interred and reinterred. These are not singular burial site. These are collective tombs that were capable to have the whole clan from multi-generation to be buried there. And when they were first constructed, they had dirt, wrapped them up and stabilized them. But now those dirt are gone and they seems precarious. They were found in many different parts of the world, like here in France, and this one is in Ireland, and this one is in Pakistan. There were also dolmen tombs discovered in Siberia, in Korea, etc. So it's quite widespreading burial structure, which might also indicate the great migration distance that early human being covered on the earth, on the surface of the earth. To some extent, the New Grange passage tomb is a super big dolmen. It is so big that the dirt covering it is not blown off. So everything is preserved. And it is huge. If you look at the human tourists visiting the site, you realize it is very big. So it is obviously not for a common clan, not for a common family. It is probably for a chieftain. The creation of gigantic tomb like this indicate the hierarchical development of human society. Someone, the great hero, great leader of a community, might be given this super big tomb, and it also serves as the kind of religious center for a tribe or even for a kingdom. So it's basically a dolmen tomb because the core is basically stone monolithic tunnels, a monolithic space, which could be called the tomb chamber in this case, and then covered by dirt. And those dirt helped to stabilize the structure. Because without the stone pile like that would not be stabilized. It needs some outside pressure to push them together. So that's the core. Let me just show you the entrance, and this is the tunnel, and the interior with a tunnel, and that the central chamber is in the shape of a cross with one bigger at the end, and then two smaller chambers on each side. At the crossing, the ceiling formed a domical structure, and that dome was created by overhanging the upper layer of stones slightly inward, and they create this dome, and this dome is called the corbelled dome, right? A corbelled dome is not a true dome because it's just cantilevered. So this kind of corbelled dome requires some kind of stabilizing pressure from outside to make sure they press inward so they won't explode to collapse. So this is the corbelled dome, what it looked like from below, right? So if you look at the review slides, you will see, there are terminologies, and those terms are candidates to be in your exam. So when you see those terms, you should make sure you know how to define them, you know where to find an example to illustrate that term, and you have a full understanding of terms like corbelled dome, or later we will have more domes like and vaults, corbelled vaults and barrel vaults, groin vaults. So these terminology are a major part of the basic knowledge about architectural history. Now let's come back to the theme of the lecture. This building is a defining time as well. The direction of the passage is oriented toward the winter solstice, right? In the winter, the sun rises from southeast, and in summer, the sun rises from northeast. So this tunnel is oriented toward southeast. The tunnel is oriented in a way to frame the first rays of the morning sunshine on a certain period of the year. And that is from December 19th to December 23rd, right around the Christmas time. Why we have Christmas on that time? Is that really the birthday of Jesus Christ? It might have more to do with winter solstice. It might have more to do with the early, sacred time that has life and death significance to human existence, like the shortest day of the year, and that is winter solstice. So at the dawn, on winter solstice, a beam of light penetrates the roof box and reach the dark chamber for 17 minutes, and then it disappears. So the whole space design was to just capture that glorious time. The ground is tilted toward the back to receive that golden sunshine. And the side of the passage were framed by those orthostat, meaning vertical stones, and they were also more refined, slightly pitted, dressed to make that space nicer. So the whole building is oriented toward winter solstice. It's a more elaborate version of the menhir. There are different interpretations of the building, of course. For example, Dorothy Walker, a feminist who believed that, and I'm not going to read this, and you can pause the video to read it. He basically believed that this is had those kind of a, he called it solar mating. It has the kind of a fertility symbolism. The sunshine is like the male part, and the tunnel is the female part. So he called this the during winter solstice. It is the connected with the ritual for the worship of Mother Goddess, Goddess, and he called that the womb of Mother Goddess. And this is also, I think, a valid interpretation. Obviously, fertility worship is an important, is significant for early human society as well. Again, there are multiple interpretations of the same architectural monument, and it doesn't have to be either or. It could be both and. Now, let's take a look at some of the Neolithic sanctuaries. Sanctuaries refer to worshiping space. So it came into being when human society evolved into a stage that they had spiritual need to be connected with a higher spirituality. And it's more kind of a religious, more organized. And as a result, a specific kind of monumental structure needs to be established for that worship or kind of ceremonial practice. One of the most famous example is the Stonehenge in England. I'm not going to elaborate on the specific detail because you can read about it in your textbook and in expanded reading. I'm just going to point out the most significant issue tied to the theme of this lecture. Stonehenge was developed over many different stages over at least 1,500 years. The site starts to be marked around 3000 BCE. And people came here to worship in more or less the same way as their ancestors as late as the second millennium BCE, 1500 BCE, for example. But over the period of more than 1,000 years, no matter how it changed, no matter how the stones were being rearranged, no matter how structures were being shifted and changed, there's one thing remains stable, and that is the orientation of the monument. The orientation is toward summer solstice. Right? In the summer, the sun rises from northeast on northern hemisphere. So in the very beginning, it was just a simple delineation of border and leaving that opening on that direction to allow the sunshine on summer solstice to be captured and measured. So when the sunshine passed that gate to cast into the center, people know that is the time of summer solstice, and that is the longest day of the year. The later development just strengthened it. So I'm not going to read everything. You can read on your own, but the development is later, the center is strengthened, and that summer solstice orientation is being strengthened. And eventually, bigger and bigger structures were established to mark that summer solstice. The final product is a bunch of trilithon. Trilithon refer to the post-lintel monolithic structure made of two gigantic orthostats with a horizontal lintel. These are called trilithon, right? 3 pieces of giant stone were arranged to form a U shape to face the direction of the summer solstice. And then there is a circle of trilithons. And then there are smaller stones to further timber the accuracy of that prediction. If in the beginning it was a wide gate that would allow the sunshine to reach the center on multiple days around the summer solstice, then finally when they put those smaller stones there, leaving a tiny little space in between, it would only allow the sunshine to pass during a certain day. And that way they define the summer solstice more accurately. And it's that kind of architecture. So again, I'm kind of skipping all those details because you can read those details in your textbook and many other books. So I'm going to highlight what I think is the most crucial aspect here. So how they were constructed, people believe they use sand, use wooden log to ship the huge stone and dig pit and use sand to help erect them. And they were also mortise and tenon joint making the connection. So you have a tongue, you have a hole. So the 2 pieces of stones were joined that way. And they also form this kind of gentle curve in the U shape and a circle. So even though it is enormous in size, it is also given great attention and great care. So it's quite a remarkable building. So there were different theories about the function, and I think they are all valid. Again, it doesn't have to be either or. It could be both and, right? But the factual reality is, it can measure many astronomical phenomena. It is crucial for the definition of time and space for a settled community. And this kind of architecture is not by no means just sporadic. There are different architecture framing those astronomical phenomena, marking specific moment in the cycle of the Earth. in different location. Like this one is also oriented toward the summer solstice, even though it is not as monumental as the famous Stonehenge, right? So this is the last example, and this one is not required. So I'm going to, again, just to show you very quickly, point to the some key issues, and you are welcome to pause the video to read the detail of the slide. These are from the Maltese island. Malta is a country in Eastern Mediterranean, it's an island country. And temples like this were discovered there. This one is from Gantiha, and Gantiha means the Tower of the Giant. And there we find the plan of the temple resembles the small figurine that were found in the temple. So this is an interesting phenomena. Both of them, we believe, indicate fertility worship. So here, a goddess exaggerating female reproductive features is holding a both horn. So in Catalhuyuk, we see precisely the same thing, even though they are separate. There were goddess figurine and there were both head sculpted on the wall, but here the goddess is holding the both head. And it is quite reasonable to interpret this as a symbol of fertility worship. And if you look at their temple, they are constructed in exactly the same way as the fertility goddess. And to some extent, entering that interior is also kind of performing some kind of fertility passage, ensuring fertility on Earth that would make Earth fertile to produce great agricultural product and to guarantee the fertility of the human race. Unlike Stonehenge, these are constructed with those monolithic structure with wall, with solid wall. They were not oriented toward the sky. They were oriented toward the dark interior of the earth. They had a ceiling, and their walls are, you know, like Skara Brae or Göbekli Tepe. They have those stone frame with the filling debris to create those thick walls. And they also used to have ceiling. So the interior should have been quite dark. So multiple sites had been discovered on the Maltese islands. So Gantiha is one place. So they also multiply to form a group, framing a central courtyard, but each temple looks the same, all right? And so here we have these structures. They are quite gigantic. They are quite big structures. And the interior remind us Skara Brae in Scotland, which is very far away, and you know, from Maltese Isles in Eastern Mediterranean. But those shelves on the wall remind us those shelves in Skara Brae, and those also stats remind us the both horn. So another site at Hagar Kim Temple, also in Malta, from 3600 BCE to 2500 BCE, had multiple rooms connected, you know, with kind of expanded space from the original profile of the goddess. Like here, it's expanded to make connection to multiple rooms, and thus created a bigger structure. But the basic material basic spatial logic remained the same. It is not oriented specifically to a astronomical phenomena, rather it is probably made for those esoteric ritual performance to guarantee fertility on Earth. And it is also probably the place for prediction, for oracle prediction as well. And the following pictures are just some pictures showing you the scale, give you a sense of the scale of these Neolithic structures. They are, you know, quite monumental. And the gate, some stones are more refined, others more robust and more crude, and might have symbolic meaning referring to the both horn as well. And the interior are dressed. We have these pitted surfaces, just like at the New Grange passage tomb. Whatever is dedicated to God or dedicated to those goddesses, to higher divinity, were made nicer, made more refined. And we know there was a roof because there are stone bases that indicate the place of a pole, of a supporting column that should be existing in order to support a roof. Some of the wall had holes. Those holes might be connected to the oracle announcement that the ritual was performed inside, and that message was passed on to whoever come to consult from outside. So those holes are known as the oracle holes. All right, so again, you know, some of the later examples I just indicate the major point that you might not, you know, find in your books, and please refer to your reading for those factual data about these later examples that I covered in smaller detail.